The first thing Philippa Ainsley noticed at the memorial supper was that one of the guests appeared to be gambling with grief. It was the 17th of May, 1817, exactly 10 years since Lord Simon Sedgwick had died, and every room of Pembury House had been dressed as though sorrow itself might inspect the arrangements and find fault. Black ribbons looped around silver candelabra. White flowers stood in severe arrangements, without a trace of cheerful colour. Even the servants seemed to move more quietly than usual, their shoes whispering over polished floors while the guests lowered their voices into tones of ceremonial regret. Yet across the drawing-room, Viscount Fallowby was rolling a small ivory counter between his fingers. One side bore the delicate carving of a laughing mask. The reverse, visible only when his hand turned, showed the number 17. Philippa watched it once, then looked away. She had spent enough years in society to understand that curiosity was often safest when kept private. At 34, she had also learned that an unmarried woman of modest fortune could observe nearly anything, so long as she did not make the mistake of appearing eager to be noticed. Philippa was neither poor nor dependent. Her late father had left her a modest annuity, sufficient for respectable independence if managed carefully, and she was spending the London season in Russell Square with Mrs. Agnes Vale, an elderly friend of her mother who preferred cards, strong tea, and blunt opinions to fashionable nonsense. Lady Ursula Pembury had invited Philippa that evening because one expected guest had fallen ill, and an uneven table offended the Marchioness more deeply than most moral failures. Ursula had made the reason clear. Within 3 minutes of Philippa's arrival, "You understand, my dear, that this was rather sudden. I assumed as much." Philippa had glanced at the place card already bearing another woman's name beneath a hastily folded replacement. Ursula's smile had sharpened. "I would hate for you to mistake a last-minute seat for social distinction." Philippa had met her gaze with complete calm. "That would be difficult, Lady Pembury. You have explained the difference so thoroughly." For one dangerous second, the Marchioness had seemed uncertain whether she had been thanked or answered back. Philippa had then inclined her head and moved toward the windows, leaving Ursula with no breach of manners she could punish. That small victory should have satisfied her. Instead, her attention returned to the man with the ivory counter. Hector Fallowby, Viscount Fallowby, was 43, elegantly dressed, socially polished, and possessed of the kind of face that seemed designed to suggest confidence without inviting intimacy. Philippa had met him twice before and remembered almost nothing he had said. Tonight, however, he was unusually alert. While others spoke of Lord Simon in reverent phrases, Hector watched the doors, while the Dowager, Countess of Bellingham, praised the late young man's charm. Hector glanced at the mantel clock, and when someone murmured that the Duke of Westerdale had not laughed since his brother's death, Hector's fingers tightened around the carved ivory piece. Philippa wondered why. She did not ask. Questions were expensive things in drawing rooms. The wrong one could cost a woman more than the answer was worth. The doors opened at 8:30. Conversation changed before the butler announced him. It did not stop entirely. That would have been vulgar. Instead, voices thinned and posture shifted as if the entire room had drawn one careful breath. His Grace, the Duke of Westerdale. Everard Sedgwick entered alone. Philippa had seen dukes before. Most were merely men surrounded by expectations. Everard was different, though not in the manner society preferred to exaggerate. He was not theatrical. He did not need to be. At 40, he carried authority with the ease of someone who had long since stopped wondering whether others recognized it. His dark evening coat was severe, his white cravat impeccable, his expression composed without appearing frozen. Yet there was something in his stillness that made the room feel over-decorated around him. Lady Ursula crossed forward with practiced solemnity. "Your Grace, it honors us that you came. Lord Pembury was kind to my brother," Everard said. "I remember that." Nothing in his voice invited further sentiment. Ursula, who could detect a closed conversational door faster than most people detected rain, turned smoothly toward the other guests. Introductions began. Philippa watched without meaning to, perhaps because everyone else was studying him too intently. Society did not look at the Duke as a man. They looked at him as a legend built from one fact repeated for 10 years. He had not laughed since the day his younger brother died. Not at dinners, not at the theatre, not among old friends, not even when the Prince Regent, according to one highly embellished version of the story, had once attempted to provoke him personally. Philippa had heard the tale in 3 drawing rooms and 2 supper lines, and every telling had made Everard less human. Grief, once observed long enough by society, became entertainment with better manners. Perhaps that was why she looked away when his gaze moved across the room. She had no desire to join the inspection. Yet a moment later she felt the odd certainty of being watched. When she glanced back, Everard's eyes were on her, not for long, barely more than the length of a breath. Still, something in his expression altered, not warmth, and certainly not amusement, but attention. Philippa looked away first. Dinner was announced. Guests arranged themselves according to precedence, while servants opened the double doors. The dining room beyond glowed with candlelight, reflected in silver and crystal. At its center stood the most elaborate sugar ornament Philippa had ever seen. A confectioner had constructed a classical funerary urn from white sugar surrounded by laurel leaves, pale swans, and tiny columns so delicate they looked incapable of surviving a sigh. A narrow black ribbon encircled the urn. Philippa suspected Lord Simon, wherever he was, might have objected to being remembered as a dessert. Her place was halfway down the table. Everard sat closer to Lady Ursula, as rank required. Hector was opposite and slightly nearer the Duke. The ivory counter had vanished into his hand, then perhaps into a pocket. Philippa could not be certain. Dinner began with soup and solemn conversation. Ursula encouraged memories of Simon. An elderly baron recalled his horsemanship. A lady spoke of his kindness during a difficult season. Hector contributed a polished anecdote that made everyone murmur appreciatively. Though Philippa noticed he watched Everard while telling it, as if measuring the effect, Everard listened with grave courtesy. He ate little. He smiled at nothing. Once, when someone described Simon as incapable of anger, a shadow passed through his expression so quickly that Philippa wondered whether she had imagined it. She did not know the brothers' private history. She had no right to. Still, she found herself thinking that public memory often polished the dead until the living could no longer recognize them. Across the table, Hector touched the inside of his coat. A strange gesture. Brief. Nervous. Philippa remembered the ivory counter and the number 17. Then Ursula turned the conversation toward her. "Miss Ainsley has been very quiet." Several faces shifted in Philippa's direction. Ursula's tone was gentle enough to deceive anyone who did not know her. Perhaps she is overwhelmed by the distinction of the evening. Philippa set down her spoon. I was listening. "How unusual in society," said the elderly woman beside her, Lady Granby, with a faint smile. Philippa returned it. "I have found it less dangerous than speaking." Everard's gaze lifted. Hector's did too. Ursula gave a small laugh without amusement. "Miss Ainsley enjoys modesty. Only when extravagance seems fully represented," Philippa said. Lady Granby lowered her head to hide a smile. A servant passed behind them with a silver dish. Philippa noticed Everard's eyes remain on her a fraction too long before he turned back toward the table. It was nothing. She told herself so. A duke's glance was not a promise, not a judgment, and certainly not an event. The final course arrived. Servants moved with careful precision around the towering sugar urn, while candle flames shivered in the warm room. Philippa saw the danger before anyone else did. The black ribbon around the base had loosened. One end had slipped beneath a silver branch, supporting the upper tier. As a young footman reached past it with a serving dish, the ribbon pulled tight. The sugar structure trembled. Philippa's hand stilled against the tablecloth. The footman did not yet see what was happening. Across the table, Hector had gone completely still. The urn tilted another inch. A hairline crack appeared along its white surface, and every fragile, impossible piece of it began to lean toward the terrified young servant. The urn leaned farther. The young footman saw it at last, but too late to move without sending the silver dish in his hands across the table. His face lost all color. Philippa understood immediately what would happen next. The sugar ornament would collapse. Lady Ursula would blame the servant. The boy would be dismissed before midnight. And tomorrow everyone would remember the broken confection, while no one remembered the person sacrificed for it. Philippa shifted her chair with enough force to draw Lady Granby's attention, steadied the nearest silver dish with one hand, and reached toward the base of the display with the other. She could not save the urn. She could only lessen the damage. The topmost laurel cracked first. A white sugar leaf dropped onto the tablecloth. Then the urn split along the line Philippa had already seen, one side folding inward with a soft, dry collapse. The footman froze. A lady at the far end of the table gasped, "What a disaster!" Philippa looked at the broken monument, then at the terrified servant. The boy's lips had parted, but no sound came. Without planning to say anything at all, Philippa turned slightly toward Lady Granby and said, "At least one monument in this room has had the courage to admit it is made of sugar." For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Everard laughed. The sound was so unexpected that Philippa almost failed to recognize it. It was not the polite breath of amusement men offered in drawing rooms. It was not a restrained chuckle designed to flatter a hostess. It came from him before he could prevent it. Warm, low, entirely real. The entire table went still. A spoon struck porcelain somewhere near Lady Ursula. One of the candles guttered in the sudden silence. Even the young footman seemed to forget the danger in front of him. Everard himself looked almost stricken. The laughter had vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him motionless, with one hand resting beside his untouched glass. Philippa had the strange impression that he had surprised himself more deeply than anyone else in the room. Across the table, Hector Fallowby rose too quickly. His chair scraped the floor. Something small slipped from his fingers, struck the edge of the carpet, and rolled beneath the table. Philippa saw only a flash of pale ivory before it disappeared near her slipper. Hector stared toward Everard, not with wonder, with alarm. That difference lodged in Philippa's mind. Lady Ursula recovered first. "How unfortunate," she said, though her eyes were fixed not on the broken sugar urn, but on the Duke. The footman began to stammer an apology. "My lady, I am terribly sorry. I did not mean to." "You should have been more careful," Ursula said sharply. The boy's shoulders tightened. Philippa opened her mouth, but Everard spoke before she could. "No." The single word changed the room. Ursula turned. "Your Grace, the servant is not to be punished." Everard's was quiet, but there was no uncertainty in it. The ornament was unstable before he reached it. Philippa looked at him. He had seen that? Perhaps he had. Or perhaps he had seen her move. Ursula gave a brittle smile. Of course, still, one expects a certain standard in a well-run household. Everard looked toward the footman, who stood as rigidly as a soldier awaiting sentence. "And I expect a man not to lose his position over spun sugar." No one answered. The Duke's gaze moved once around the table, then returned to Ursula. "If the evening has suffered any loss of solemnity, the responsibility is mine." His expression did not change. I was the one who laughed. The effect was immediate. Lady Ursula could no longer blame the footman, without appearing to contradict a duke in her own dining room. The boy bowed so quickly that the dish in his hands trembled, then withdrew under the direction of the butler. Philippa watched him go. Only after he reached the door safely did she realize Everard was watching her. There was no smile on his face now. Something more cautious had replaced it. Curiosity, perhaps, or discomfort. Around them, conversation attempted to recover. It failed. Guests began speaking in low voices to their neighbors, pretending not to discuss the one thing every person at the table was thinking. Philippa looked down. The pale object Hector had dropped rested just beside the hem of her gown. She bent as if adjusting her slipper and picked it up. It was the same ivory counter she had seen earlier. A laughing mask on one side, the number 17 on the other. She closed her fingers around it. For the moment, returning, it would mean interrupting the entire table, and she had no wish to turn another accident into spectacle. She slipped it into the small pocket sewn inside her gown. When she looked up, Hector was staring at the place where it had fallen. His eyes moved toward Philippa. She could not tell whether he knew she had found it. Dinner resumed, though not naturally. The broken ornament was carried away piece by piece. Lady Ursula redirected conversation toward music. Lady Granby asked the Baron opposite whether his daughter had recovered from a winter fever. Everyone behaved as though the room had not just witnessed the impossible. Everard spoke little, yet something had changed in him. Philippa could see it in the slight tension around his mouth, as though he were holding back not another laugh, but the memory of one. She had not meant to cause it. That mattered to her more than it should have. When dinner ended and the ladies withdrew, Philippa expected the moment to dissolve into gossip. Instead, it followed her into the drawing room. 2 women approached within minutes. A third asked Lady Granby whether Miss Ainsley was always so amusing. Ursula appeared at Philippa's elbow before she could answer. "You have attracted a great deal of attention. So has the sugar urn." Ursula's eyes narrowed. "I would advise you not to mistake accident for influence." Philippa met her gaze. "I have no intention of doing so." "Good." Ursula lowered her voice. "A duke's notice can be dangerous to a woman who imagines it means more than it does." Philippa felt the insult clearly enough. She chose not to receive it in the form intended. "Then it is fortunate I have imagined nothing." Before Ursula could reply, the gentleman entered. Conversation shifted again. Everard crossed the room slowly, pausing when addressed, answering when courtesy required it. Yet his path, Philippa noticed, brought him directly toward her. Ursula moved away half a step, which was as close to retreat as she ever came. Everard stopped before Philippa. "Miss Aingrace." For a moment he said nothing. The room around them seemed to listen without appearing to. Philippa understood then that whatever he asked next would be repeated across half of London by morning. His gaze held hers. "Did you mean to make me laugh?" The question was quieter than she expected. It did not sound accusing. It sounded almost unsettled. "No, Your Grace." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Nearly one. "I thought not." Philippa should have let the exchange end there. Instead, she said, "I was trying to save the footman." "I know." She blinked. "You saw. I saw you move before anyone else did." His eyes held hers for one beat longer. "You gave them something else to look at." Philippa glanced toward the door where the young servant had disappeared. It seemed kinder. It was. The words were simple. Their effect was not. No one had ever praised Philippa for a kindness she had not meant to display. She looked away first. Across the room, Hector was watching them. His expression was smooth again, but his right hand touched the inside of his coat as though searching for something that was no longer there. Philippa felt the weight of the ivory counter hidden in her pocket. Everard inclined his head and moved away. Only then did she breathe fully. The following morning, shortly after 11, Mrs. Agnes Vale entered the Russell Square drawing-room holding a silver tray. "You have a caller's card," she said. Philippa looked up from her tea. "At this hour? At this rank?" Agnes set the tray before her. The card read, "The Duke of Westerdale." Philippa had barely picked it up when the front door sounded again. Then once more. Within 15 minutes, 3 additional callers had arrived, each carrying the same hungry curiosity. One of them asked, before removing her gloves, "My dear Miss Ainsley, do you think you could make him laugh again?" Philippa looked down at the Duke's card in her hand. In the pocket of yesterday's gown, upstairs and out of sight, lay a small ivory counter marked with a laughing face and the number 17. For the first time, Philippa wondered whether the laugh had changed more than a room. By 11:30, Philippa had learned that becoming interesting to society was considerably more exhausting than being ignored by it. The first caller, Lady Merton, had arrived with the breathless curiosity of someone bringing condolences to a house where no one had died. The second, Mrs. Bellamy, had brought her unmarried niece, who stared at Philippa as though studying a performer before a command appearance. The third had already asked whether Philippa believed she could make the Duke laugh again. Mrs. Agnes Vale, seated near the window with her tea and the expression of a woman who had survived 68 years by refusing to be impressed, lifted one eyebrow. Perhaps Miss Ainsley should charge admission. Lady Merton gave a startled laugh. "Oh, Mrs. Vale, you are wicked." "No," Agnes replied, "merely practical." Philippa hid a smile behind her cup. Before the callers had arrived, she had gone upstairs and removed the ivory counter from the pocket of the gown she had worn the previous night. It now rested in the small pocket of her day dress. She had turned it over twice in the morning light. A laughing mask. The number 17. Nothing else. No crest. No initials. No mark she recognized. Yet she remembered Hector Fallowby's alarm when the Duke laughed, and the way his hand had gone to his coat afterward, searching for the object that was no longer there. Philippa had decided she would return it when next she saw him. Until then, she saw no reason to build a mystery from an accident. Unfortunately, London appeared determined to build a spectacle from one. You must tell us exactly what you said, Mrs. Bellamy insisted. Exactly? Philippa asked. Every word. I am afraid the remark was not prepared for preservation. The niece leaned forward. But you could say something amusing now. Philippa looked at her. The girl could not have been more than 19. There was no malice in the request, only the careless expectation that once a woman had amused a duke, amusement must become her profession. I could, Philippa said. But then we might both be disappointed. Lady Merton laughed too loudly. Mrs. Bellamy did not. Surely you understand why people are curious. His Grace has not laughed in 10 years. So I have been told, and yet you managed it. Philippa set down her cup. I did not manage anything. A sugar ornament collapsed. I made a remark to Lady Granby. His Grace happened to hear it. But what made you think of it? A broken sugar urn. Mrs. Bellamy stared. Agnes coughed into her hand. Philippa suspected it concealed another smile. The door opened, and the maid entered with a silver tray. Agnes took the card, glanced at it, and became suddenly more attentive. His Grace, the Duke of Westerdale. The change in the room was immediate. Lady Merton straightened. Mrs. Bellamy adjusted one glove. Her niece flushed. Philippa felt something quieter, not excitement, not fear, awareness. Everard had seen her save a frightened footman from blame. He had thanked her without turning the act into sentiment. That had remained with her longer than the laughter. A few moments later, he entered the drawing-room. Daylight made him appear less legendary and more human, though no less formidable. His dark coat was sober, his expression composed, and he bowed first to Agnes, with the courtesy due the mistress of the house. Mrs. Vale. Agnes inclined her head. Your Grace, the other ladies rose. Introductions were hardly necessary, but they were made. Everyone sat. For several seconds, conversation struggled under the weight of rank. Lady Merton recovered first. Your Grace, we were just discussing last evening. Everard looked toward Philippa. Were you? Miss Ainsley has been very modest. I have never known modesty to survive discussion of itself, Agnes observed. Everard's mouth shifted slightly. Not a smile. Almost. Lady Merton leaned forward. We were hoping Miss Ainsley might tell us whether she can do it again. Silence followed. Philippa felt the question land between them. Everard did not look offended. He looked tired. Do what again? He asked. Mrs. Bellamy laughed nervously. Why, make you laugh, Your Grace. Everard's gaze moved from her to Lady Merton, then to the young niece. He spoke without raising his voice. Miss Ainsley is not a performance. The room became still. He continued, no harsher than before. Nor do I require one. Lady Merton looked down at her gloves. Mrs. Bellamy murmured that she had meant no disrespect. Everard inclined his head once, allowing the matter to die without humiliating anyone further. Philippa noticed that he could have used his rank to crush the question. Instead, he simply refused its premise. It was a distinction she did not expect from him. Within 10 minutes, the 3 callers found reasons to leave. The young niece, before departing, glanced back at Philippa with something like embarrassment. Philippa gave her a small smile. The girl seemed relieved. When the door closed behind the last of them, Agnes announced that she intended to examine correspondence at the escritoire near the far end of the drawing-room. It was a transparent concession to privacy without abandoning propriety. Everard remained seated opposite Philippa. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Philippa said, You have frightened away half my morning. Only half? The more persistent half. His eyes held hers. Then I regret nothing. She almost smiled. That is a dangerous reputation to cultivate. I have worse ones. The answer was dry enough that she looked at him more carefully. He did possess humour. Then, even if society had decided otherwise, perhaps it had simply gone unused for too long. "Do you regret last evening?" she asked. The question changed him. Not visibly to anyone who did not know where to look, but Philippa saw his shoulders become more still. His right hand moved toward his waistcoat. He drew out a gold pocket watch, not opening it at first. "Regret the supper?" The laugh. His thumb rested against the watch case. "No." The answer came after a pause. "But I do not know what to do with the fact of it." Philippa did not pretend to understand. "You need not do anything." Society appears to disagree. Society often mistakes observation for ownership. He looked at her then, fully. The silence between them sharpened, not unpleasantly. Everard opened the watch. Philippa saw the hands, 6:10. She waited for the second hand to move. It did not. She looked away before curiosity became intrusion. "You noticed," he said. "Yes." "You are not going to ask?" "No." "Why not?" Philippa considered the question. "Because you know the answer and I do not. That does not make the answer mine." Something in his expression loosened. He closed the watch. "You are unusual, Miss Ainsley." That is what people say when they are trying not to say peculiar. "I was not." "Then I shall accept the distinction." This time, the faintest warmth touched his face. Not laughter, not quite a smile, but something near enough that Philippa felt the room alter around it. She reminded herself not to assign meaning where none had been offered. Everard rose after several more minutes of conversation. Agnes looked up from her letters. Philippa stood as well. He was nearly at the door when she remembered the ivory counter. "Your Grace?" He turned. Philippa reached into the small pocket of her dress and brought out the object. "This was dropped last evening." Everard came closer. She placed the counter on her open palm. The laughing mask faced upward. He studied it without touching. "Do you recognize it?" she asked. "No." His answer was immediate. Genuine, she thought. She turned the counter over. The number 17 appeared. "I saw Lord Fallowby holding it before dinner. When you laughed, he stood suddenly and dropped it." Everard went completely still. The change was so slight that Agnes, across the room, might not have noticed. Philippa did. "Hector?" he asked. "Yes." "You are certain?" "I saw it in his hand before dinner. I saw it fall when he rose." Everard looked again at the counter. "And you have had it since?" "I picked it up from beside my slipper. I intended to return it." His gaze lifted to hers. "Do not give it to anyone yet." The words came too quickly. He seemed to realize it. "Forgive me. I have no right to command what you do with something in your possession." Philippa closed her fingers around the ivory piece. "No, you do not." A pause. Then she added, "But you may tell me why Lord Fallowby's name troubles you." Everard looked toward the closed door, then back at her. "Because Hector notices everything that can be measured." "And laughter can be measured?" I would have said no. His eyes dropped once more to her closed hand. "Yesterday may have proved me wrong." 6 days after the memorial supper, Philippa discovered that a woman could become notorious in London without committing a single sin, provided enough people were disappointed that she refused to entertain them. By the evening of the 22nd of May, invitations had arrived from women who had never before remembered her address. Notes appeared in excessively intimate hands. One countess proposed a supper at which Philippa might sit near the Duke of Westerdale again, as though proximity were a scientific experiment. Another offered what she called a perfectly harmless little gathering, then added that several guests had placed wagers on whether His Grace could be induced to smile twice in 1 fortnight. Philippa had declined both. She had also ignored 3 requests to repeat the remark about the sugar urn. The words had been spontaneous once. Repetition would make them performance, and she had no desire to spend the season becoming a curiosity people summoned after dessert. Still, when Mrs. Agnes Vale announced that they would attend the opera that evening with Lady Granby, Philippa agreed. Remaining at home would look like retreat, and she had already decided that curiosity would not dictate where she was allowed to go. The ivory counter remained in her possession. She carried it in the inner pocket of her gown, wrapped in a small square of linen so that its carved edges would not catch on the fabric. She had not shown it to anyone since Everard's visit. His warning had stayed with her. Do not give it to anyone yet. Then his immediate correction. I have no right to command what you do with something in your possession. That correction had mattered more than the warning. Men of great rank were accustomed to being obeyed before they finished speaking. Everard Sedgwick, at least, appeared capable of hearing himself when authority became habit. The King's Theatre glittered with candlelight and conversation. Music drifted from the orchestra while opera glasses lifted across ranks of boxes. Philippa sat between Agnes and Lady Granby, grateful for both women. Agnes had perfected the art of making gossip feel foolish by looking bored with it. Lady Granby, old enough to have stopped fearing society several decades earlier, had greeted Philippa by saying, "If one more woman asks you to make the Duke laugh, tell her to stand on her head. It would be equally dignified." Philippa had liked her ever since. Everard occupied a box across the theatre with 2 gentlemen Philippa did not know. She noticed him only because Lady Granby did. "There he is," the older woman murmured. Philippa did not immediately look. "Who?" Lady Granby gave her a sidelong glance. "If modesty has made you blind, I withdraw every compliment I have paid your intelligence." Philippa eventually glanced across the theatre. Everard was speaking to the man beside him, but at that moment his gaze shifted. Their eyes met across the distance. He inclined his head. Philippa did the same, nothing more, yet she felt, absurdly, as though an invisible line had been drawn between the boxes. The first act passed without incident. During the interval, the corridors and withdrawing rooms filled with conversation. Agnes remained with Lady Granby, while Philippa moved only a few steps away to allow another lady to pass. That was when she saw Hector Fallowby. He stood near a column speaking to 2 gentlemen, polished and composed, no trace of the alarm she had seen at the memorial supper. For an instant, Philippa considered leaving the counter where it was. Then she rejected the thought. The object was his, or appeared to be. She preferred clarity to speculation. When his companions moved away, she approached. "Lord Fallowby." Hector turned. His smile arrived at once. "Miss Ainsley, London's most sought-after wit. I hope not. It sounds exhausting." Fame usually is. She studied him. Nothing in his expression suggested discomfort. "I believe you dropped something at Lady Pembury's supper." His smile remained. "Did I?" Philippa drew the linen-wrapped counter from her pocket and unfolded the cloth. The laughing mask faced upward in her palm. Hector looked at it, only for a fraction of a second, yet Philippa saw recognition. His eyes fixed. His right hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the inside of his coat. Then the moment vanished. "I am afraid you are mistaken," he said. Philippa turned the counter over. The number 17 caught the candlelight. "I saw it in your hand before dinner. Did you?" "Yes." Hector gave a light laugh. "Then I must regret disappointing so observant a witness. I have never seen it before." The lie was so smooth that Philippa almost admired it. She did not argue. Then I shall keep looking for its owner. How conscientious. I try. His gaze lowered once more to the counter, a curious little thing. You are certain you do not recognize it? Perfectly. Philippa folded the linen around it and returned it to her pocket. Then I have troubled you for nothing. No trouble at all. Hector's smile deepened. Though I confess, I find it charming that you notice what men carry in their hands. Philippa met his gaze. Only when they drop it beside my feet. She left him before he could answer. Everard had seen enough to know that something had passed between them. He approached 10 minutes later when the corridor had thinned, Agnes and Lady Granby remaining within sight. What did Fallowby say to you? Philippa looked at him. You ask directly. Would you prefer ornament? No. Then what did he say? She appreciated that he did not ask what she had been doing speaking to Hector. He asked for facts. I offered him the counter. He denied ever seeing it before. Everard's expression changed. Entirely? Entirely. And you told him you saw it in his hand? Yes. What did he say? That he regretted disappointing so observant a witness. Everard glanced toward Hector, who now stood at the far end of the corridor, speaking to an elderly peer. Did he ask for the counter? No. Did he touch it? No. Did anyone else? No. His gaze returned to her. And you still have it? Yes. Something in his shoulders eased. Philippa noticed and said, You seem relieved. I am. Why? Because a man who lies about recognizing a harmless object either fears the object or fears the truth attached to it. Philippa considered this. You have begun to sound very certain that he lied. Do you think he did? Yes. Then I am merely respecting your judgment. Before Philippa could answer, a bright voice interrupted them. Lady Morcott, whose enthusiasm had survived 3 marriages and an astonishing number of bad ideas, approached with a smile. Your Grace, Miss Ainsley, how fortunate. Philippa had learned that when Lady Morcott called something fortunate, someone else was usually about to be inconvenienced. Lady Morcott, Everard said, I have been longing to ask. She turned eagerly to Philippa. Can you produce another laugh tonight? Philippa felt weariness before embarrassment. Everard answered first. His Grace is capable of knowing when he is amused. Lady Morcott blinked. The use of his own title in the third person made the correction almost absurdly formal. Yet the edge beneath it was unmistakable. Of course, she said quickly. I only meant, I know what you meant. His tone softened enough to allow escape. Miss Ainsley need not prove anything for my benefit. Lady Morcott murmured agreement and withdrew towards safer company. Philippa looked at Everard. You have become very efficient at frightening people away. A useful ducal accomplishment, one of many, I imagine. Fewer than advertised. She smiled despite herself. He saw it. The moment lasted only a second, but this time his expression warmed without fear. No laughter came. None was demanded. For the first time, Philippa understood why his company had begun to matter. He did not ask her to reproduce the thing that had made him notice her. And she did not ask him to become the man society had decided he ought to be. The bell sounded for the next act. Everard stepped back. Keep the counter. I intended to. Good, still not a command, a request. Better. His mouth almost curved. I am learning. Later that night, after returning to Westerdale House, Everard had barely removed his gloves when his private secretary requested permission to speak. The man carried no letter, only a small notebook and an expression of controlled concern. Your Grace, I made inquiries as you asked. Everard turned, and a gaming counter matching Miss Ainsley's description has been mentioned before. Silence settled between them. Where? in connection with a private gentleman's wager. Everard's face became still. What sort of wager? The secretary hesitated. One concerning you, Your Grace. Everard did not move for several seconds. His private secretary, Mr. Doring, stood near the desk with the small notebook still in hand, waiting with the patience of a man who had learned that silence was sometimes part of his employer's answer. At last Everard said, "Begin at the beginning." Mr. Doring glanced down at his notes. The counter described by Miss Ainsley appears to belong to a private system used by a small circle of gentlemen who settle certain wagers among themselves. Numbered pieces, ivory, a laughing mask on one side. Everard's face hardened, and the subject of this wager, the secretary hesitated only once, whether Your Grace would laugh before midnight on the 17th of May. The room seemed to contract around the words. Everard looked toward the dark window. Outside, London moved without caring what had just been said. Carriage wheels passed in the street. Somewhere below, a servant closed a door. Inside the study, the air had become still. How long has this been happening? I cannot yet say with certainty. Then say what you can. Mr. Doring closed the notebook. There have been smaller wagers for years, some apparently frivolous, whether Your Grace would smile at a dinner, whether a particular actress could amuse you, whether a hostess could provoke a reaction. He paused. The sums increased as the 10th anniversary approached. Everard's gaze returned to him. The anniversary of my brother's death became a betting date. Yes, Your Grace. The answer was quiet. That made it worse. Everard walked to the mantel and placed one hand against it. Anger came easily enough. He could feel it moving through him, hot and clean, demanding action. What he did not know how to bear was the humiliation beneath it. 10 years of restraint, 10 years of allowing society to build whatever story it wished around him, because correcting the story would have required speaking about Simon, and all the while men had been turning that silence into odds. Who? He asked. I have only one confirmed name. Everard already knew before Mr. Doring said it. Lord Fallowby. The old clock on the mantel ticked 3 times. Everard lowered his head. Hector had stood in Ursula's dining room on the exact anniversary. He had watched the table, watched the clock, watched him. Then, when Philippa spoke and laughter escaped before Everard could stop it, Hector had risen in alarm and dropped the ivory counter. Number 17. How much? Everard asked. The exact amount is not confirmed. Then what is? Enough to matter. Mr. Doring chose his next words carefully. Enough that if the laugh is accepted as genuine, Lord Fallowby faces considerable private embarrassment and possibly severe debt pressure. Everard turned. Accepted as genuine? That appears to be the language used. The implication arrived at once. Everard saw Philippa at the memorial table, one hand moving to save the silver dish. Her remark given quietly to Lady Granby, not to him. He saw Hector's face after the laugh. He saw Philippa offering the counter at the opera and Hector denying ever having seen it. He needs the laugh to be false. That would seem to benefit him. Everard's voice became colder, and to make it false, he needs Miss Ainsley to have staged it. Mr. Doring said nothing. He did not need to. Everard crossed the room and reached for the bell pull, then stopped. His first instinct was to summon lawyers, stewards, club secretaries, anyone whose position could be used to crush the matter before dawn. The instinct was almost physical. Power was easiest when exercised quickly. Then Philippa's voice returned to him from Russell Square. No, you do not. She had not said it angrily. That had made it sharper. Everard let his hand fall. Continue your inquiries, he said, quietly. I want no accusation made without proof. Find out who issued the counters, who kept the settlements, and how often Hector's name appears. Yes, Your Grace, and no one is to approach Miss Ainsley about the object in her possession. Mr. Doring inclined his head. Very good. Everard looked at him. You understand why? Because it is hers to decide what is done with it. The answer surprised him. Then he realized it should not have. Precisely. By the afternoon of the 25th of May, Philippa knew something had changed before Everard told her what it was. He came to Russell Square shortly after 2, well within respectable calling hours, and Agnes Vale remained in the drawing-room. Though she took up a book near the window with such determination that no sensible person could mistake her intention to hear nothing unless required by propriety. Philippa had been expecting a social visit. She understood within moments that this was not one. Everard did not waste time with pleasantries. The ivory counter belongs to a private wagering system. Philippa's fingers stilled over the embroidery. She had not been doing particularly well. A gaming system. A betting system. He remained standing until she indicated the chair opposite. Only then did he sit. The counters are numbered. The laughing mask is not decorative. She watched his face. And number 17 is connected to a wager involving me. Agnes turned a page across the room. Philippa heard it, but her attention did not leave Everard. What kind of wager? He was silent long enough that she knew the answer would cost him something. Whether I would laugh before midnight on the 17th of May. Philippa felt the full ugliness of it before she found words. The anniversary. Yes, she looked away. For the first time since the memorial supper, she understood Hector's alarm. Not surprise, loss, calculation. And Lord Fallowby, his name is connected to the wager. Connected how strongly? Everard's eyes met hers. Strongly enough that I believe the counter may be his. Philippa reached into the small pocket of her dress and withdrew the linen-wrapped object. She placed it on the table, but did not open the cloth immediately. You said, believe. I do not yet have proof sufficient for accusation. She looked at him then, and something like approval moved quietly through her. He was angry. She could see that. Yet he had not turned anger into certainty. That is careful of you. It does not feel careful. No, it feels slow, intolerably. She unfolded the linen. The ivory mask looked almost cheerful. That offended her more now that she understood its purpose. Do you want it? She asked. Everard's gaze dropped to the counter, then returned to her. For inspection, eventually, not permanently. And not without your permission. Philippa considered him for a moment. You remembered, I am trying to. She touched the edge of the linen. Then I will allow it to be inspected when you have someone trustworthy to inspect it. Until then, it stays with me. Agreed. The ease of his answer surprised her. You do not wish to argue. I have discovered it is rarely productive. With women, with you. Philippa almost smiled. That is a dangerous distinction. I have worse reputations. She remembered he had said the same thing once before, and this time the line warmed the room rather than hiding him inside it. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Philippa asked, How many men have been betting on your grief? The question was blunt. She expected him to retreat. Instead, Everard looked down at his hands. I do not know. How long? Possibly years. Philippa felt anger then, but not the dramatic kind. It was colder. They turned your silence into amusement. Apparently. And your brother's death into a date on a wager. His jaw tightened. Yes, she thought of the memorial table. Black ribbons. Lowered voices. Hector watching the clock. That is why you are angry. Everard looked up. Would you not be? I would. She paused. But I do not think that is all. Something changed in his expression. Philippa continued carefully. You are angry because they watched you. But perhaps you are also angry because they decided they understood what your silence meant. He did not answer. She wondered whether she had gone too far. Then he said, People prefer grief when it is visible. It allows them to admire their own sympathy. And when it is not, they invent meaning. Philippa glanced at the closed gold watch beneath his waistcoat. She did not ask about 6:10. Not yet. Then perhaps the wager is not the only thing that needs proof. Everard's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? If Hector wishes to deny the laugh was genuine, he must create another explanation for it, that it was staged. By me. Everard's expression darkened. He will not. Philippa held his gaze. He may try. The room became very quiet. Everard leaned back, control settling over him again, but she could feel the anger beneath it. If he does, I will stop him. Philippa looked at him steadily. No. His brow shifted. No, not before we know how. Miss Ainsley, you have power. That means you can destroy the wrong thing very efficiently. For 1 second, she thought she had gone too far. Then Everard looked toward Agnes, who remained apparently absorbed in her book, and back again. You believe I should wait. I believe you should find out what is true before deciding what must be done. His mouth tightened. You make patience sound like a virtue. It is usually a punishment. That did it. A faint smile appeared, brief but unmistakable. Philippa saw it and deliberately said nothing. She would not reward him for being human as though he were a trained creature. The smile faded, but not from fear. I trust your judgment more than my anger, he said quietly. The words caught her unprepared. She looked down at counter number 17 between them. A week earlier, it had been only a curious object on the carpet. Now it represented something darker, a private cruelty dressed as sport, a debt, a motive, perhaps a threat. Everard rose when the call had stretched as long as propriety allowed. Before leaving, he paused beside the small table. Keep it hidden. Philippa raised an eyebrow, a request, a strong one. Better, he almost smiled again. At the door he stopped. His hand moved toward the gold pocket watch beneath his coat, then fell away. You asked me once whether I regretted laughing. Philippa waited. I do not. His voice was steady. But I think I owe you the truth about why I stopped. She knew immediately what he meant. 6:10. The motionless hands. The thing she had chosen not to ask, only if you wish to tell it. Everard looked at her for a long moment. I do. 3 days later, on the 28th of May, Everard returned to Russell Square carrying the truth he had promised, and looking like a man who had spent those 3 days deciding whether the truth was a burden or a confession. Philippa knew it before he spoke. Mrs. Agnes Vale received him in the drawing-room with impeccable propriety, then settled near the far window with a basket of correspondence, and the expression of a woman determined to be both present and absent at once. Afternoon light fell across the carpet. A carriage passed outside. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 2. Everard remained standing until Philippa indicated the chair opposite her. He sat, but not easily. His right hand rested against the front of his coat, where the gold pocket watch lay hidden. Philippa remembered the motionless hands at 6:10. She also remembered what she had said 3 days earlier, only if you wished to tell it. Now he had come because he did. For several moments, neither spoke. Everard looked toward Agnes, then back at Philippa. You asked me once whether I regretted laughing. Yes, I told you I did not. You did. His thumb pressed once against the edge of the watch beneath his coat. That answer was true. It was not complete. Philippa waited. She had learned long ago that silence could be kinder than encouragement when a person was trying to say something difficult. Everard noticed the silence. She saw it in the slight change in his eyes. Then he drew the gold watch from his pocket and placed it in his palm. He did not open it immediately. My brother Simon died 10 years ago, on the 17th of May. I know. What society remembers is that he was charming, young, generous, and dead before anyone had time to find fault with him. His mouth tightened, not with bitterness, but with something more painful. That is not false. It is only incomplete. Philippa said nothing. Everard opened the watch. The hands remained fixed at 6:10. Simon could be reckless. He could also be impatient. He thought quickly, forgave quickly, and became angry quickly. I was the opposite. You thought before speaking, usually too long. The faint dryness in his voice vanished almost at once. He used to accuse me of turning every feeling into analysis. He said I could explain sorrow for an hour without admitting I was sad. Philippa looked at him. Was he wrong? Everard met her gaze. No. The answer was simple enough to hurt. He lowered his eyes to the watch. On the afternoon he died, we argued. Not about anything grand. No inheritance. No scandal. No betrayal. That almost makes it worse. Why? Because I spent years wishing the quarrel had been important enough to justify remembering every word. His voice remained steady, but the effort behind it was clear. Simon had promised to meet someone in Hampshire concerning an estate matter. I told him the weather was turning and the roads were poor. He said I was using caution as another word for control. Philippa did not react, though the word settled between them with quiet force. Everard continued. I told him he confused impulse with freedom. He said I confused restraint with virtue. For the first time, Philippa could imagine the two brothers clearly, not as a saint and a survivor, as men, young enough to wound each other with truth, sharpened by affection. Then, she asked gently. Everard's jaw shifted. He became angry, very angry, he said. I did not know how to love anyone unless I could protect them from becoming inconvenient. Philippa felt something tighten in her chest. Everard did not look at her. Perhaps he understood the words had survived, because some part of him still feared they were true. And you laughed, she said. He nodded once. Not because he was foolish, not because I despised him. It was reflex. He was furious, and he looked so much like himself that I laughed. His fingers closed around the open watch. Simon thought I was mocking him. Were you? No. The answer came immediately, but I did not explain. I was proud. He was angry. He left before either of us chose better words. The room had grown very quiet. Agnes turned a page near the window. Philippa heard the faint scrape of paper. Everard stared at the frozen watch. At 6:10 that evening, a messenger came to Westerdale House. Philippa knew what he would say before he said it, but she let him say it. Simon's horse had gone down on a wet road. He was badly injured. He died before I could reach him. Everard's voice did not break. That made it more painful, not less. I opened this watch when the messenger arrived. It was 6:10. I stopped it. Philippa looked at the watch in his hand. 10 years of silence reduced to 2 motionless hands. And you never wound it again? No. Why? Everard gave a small, humorless breath. Because I was a coward. That is a large answer. It is also an accurate one. Philippa waited. He continued. If I laughed again, it seemed to mean the last laugh did not matter. If I allowed myself joy, perhaps I had not loved him enough. Grief became proof. The longer I remained unchanged, the more loyal I felt. He looked at her then, and she saw the terrible intelligence of the trap. After a few years, I no longer knew whether I was mourning Simon or obeying the man I had been when he died. Philippa felt no impulse to tell him that Simon would have forgiven him. She had never met Simon. She would not steal authority from the dead simply to comfort the living. "You have spent 10 years asking grief to prove that you loved him," she said. Everard became still. Philippa held his gaze. "Perhaps love has already proved enough." The words remained between them. He did not look away. For a long moment, she thought he might reject them. Instead, his expression altered with such restraint that another person might have missed it. Pain did not disappear. Something beside it simply made room. "You do not tell me he would have forgiven me," he said. "I cannot know that. Most people do. Most people are eager to make the dead agreeable." A faint change touched his mouth, not amusement exactly. "Recognition," Philippa continued. "You knew your brother. You know what was left unfinished. But uncertainty is not the same as guilt, and sorrow is not the same as duty." Everard looked down at the watch. "You make it sound simple." "No, I make it sound possible." That silence was different, softer. Everard rose, crossed the small distance between them, then stopped at the edge of propriety. Agnes remained visible near the window. He held out the watch. Philippa looked at it, then at him. "What do you want me to do? Hold it." She did not ask why. She placed her hand beneath his. Everard lowered the watch into her palm. It was heavier than she expected. Warm from his body. She looked down at the unmoving hands. 6:10. 10 years of punishment contained in gold and glass. Philippa did not close her fingers around it as though claiming something precious. She simply held it. Everard watched her with an expression she could not fully read. "It is only a watch," she said quietly. "Yes, and not only a watch. No." She returned it before he asked. His fingers closed around the case. Something in his face softened. Most people would have kept holding it. Most people were not given permission to keep it. His eyes met hers. "You notice boundaries. They are easier to respect when one knows they exist." The words carried no accusation. Yet, Everard seemed to hear more in them than she had intended. Perhaps Simon's charge had not stopped echoing after all. He returned the watch to his pocket. "You are kinder than you believe." Philippa raised one eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously like praise." "It was intended as such." "Then I shall try not to become unbearable." This time, something unmistakable warmed his expression. Not laughter, not yet, but no fear followed it. Philippa felt an answering warmth and refused to examine it too closely. Their conversation turned briefly to ordinary matters, which made the extraordinary ones feel more real. When Everard finally rose to leave, Agnes set aside her correspondence and joined them near the door. He bowed to her, then to Philippa. "Thank you," he said. Philippa knew he did not mean for the tea. "You chose to tell me." "Yes, then the courage was yours." Everard looked at her for a long moment before leaving. 3 days later, at Somerset House, Philippa would open an exhibition catalogue and find her own face staring back at her from a cruel, satirical print. But on that afternoon in Russell Square, she knew only this. The Duke of Westerdale had placed the stopped watch in her hand, and for the first time in 10 years, he had spoken of the brother behind the legend as a living, imperfect man rather than a monument built by grief. 3 days later, on the 2nd of June, Philippa stood beneath the high ceilings of Somerset House and realized that cruelty became more respectable when printed on good paper. She had arrived with Agnes Vale and Lady Granby shortly after noon. when the Royal Academy exhibition rooms were already crowded with fashionable visitors, pretending to look at paintings while studying one another more carefully than any canvas. Philippa had expected whispers. She had grown accustomed to them. Since the memorial supper, strangers had learned her name, invitations had multiplied, and women who had ignored her for years now asked whether she possessed some secret talent for making powerful men forget themselves. She had refused every invitation that treated her like a trick. Still, she would not hide at home. Agnes had approved of that decision. If society insists on staring, the older woman had said, it may at least have the inconvenience of doing so while you enjoy yourself. For the first quarter hour, Philippa almost did. Lady Granby criticized 3 portraits with cheerful severity. Agnes declared a landscape impossible because no English sky had ever looked so obedient. Philippa even forgot, briefly, that the ivory counter marked 17 rested in the inner pocket of her gown, wrapped carefully in linen and still in her possession. Then a folded sheet slipped from the exhibition catalogue in her hands. It landed face upward on the polished floor. Philippa looked down. Her own face stared back at her. The likeness was cruel rather than accurate, but unmistakable. She had been drawn in a fool's cap, one hand holding a purse heavy with coins, the other tugging a chain fastened to the Duke of Westerdale's gold watch. Everard appeared behind her, grave and helpless, as though she had led him by his grief like an animal on a leash. Beneath the image, in heavy type, were the words, "A laugh at 50 guineas." Philippa did not move. Around her, paper rustled. Someone gasped. Another woman began to laugh, not with her, at her. Agnes bent quickly and snatched up the caricature, but it was already too late. Identical sheets were falling from other catalogues across the room. A gentleman near the doorway unfolded one and raised his brows. 2 young women whispered behind their fans. Someone said, "So that is how she did it." Another voice answered, "One must admire the ambition." Philippa heard every word with terrible clarity. The accusation was obvious. She had staged the accident at the memorial supper. She had planned the remark. She had manipulated a grieving duke for money, fame, or marriage. Perhaps all 3. Lady Granby stepped closer to her. "Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you falter." Philippa breathed in once. "I had not intended to." Her voice was steady. She was grateful for that. Across the gallery, a movement in the crowd caught her eye. Hector Fallowby stood near a marble bust, speaking to a gentleman whose expression was far too amused. Hector held no caricature. He did not need one. He glanced toward Philippa and looked away almost immediately. The action was small. So was the satisfaction that briefly touched his face. Philippa felt cold. Then Lady Ursula Pembury arrived. She took one printed sheet from a passing acquaintance, studied it, and allowed the room to wait for her opinion. "I had always feared," she said in a voice pitched carefully for others to hear, "that Miss Ainsley's cleverness might become ambition if sufficiently encouraged." Agnes turned toward her. "You have a remarkable talent for mistaking cruelty for discernment." Ursula smiled. "I speak only from concern." "Then concern has become surprisingly decorative." Philippa touched Agnes's arm before the exchange could sharpen. "Please." Not because Ursula deserved protection, because Philippa refused to let the room decide she needed champions before she had found her own footing. She looked again at the caricature in Agnes's hand. The watch chain troubled her. The artist knew about the watch. Perhaps not the meaning of 610, but enough to know the watch mattered. Someone knew the wager, someone knew the memorial supper, someone had chosen to turn both into ridicule. A murmur spread through the room. Then people began moving aside. Everard had entered the gallery. Philippa knew the exact moment he saw the print. His expression did not collapse. It became still. That was worse. He crossed the room, took one copy from a gentleman's hand without asking, and looked at it. Silence widened around him. Philippa watched his gaze move over the fool's cap, the purse, the chain, the representation of his stopped watch. She saw anger enter him with frightening precision. "Doring," he said. His private secretary appeared almost at once. "Your Grace." Everard held up the sheet. "Find every copy in this building." "Yes, Your Grace." "Buy them." Philippa looked at him sharply. Doring hesitated. "All of them?" "Everyone." Everard turned to another servant. "Send for my carriage." His eyes found Philippa. "Miss Ainsley, you will leave by the side entrance before the crowd increases." She stared at him. The room seemed to disappear, not because he doubted her. She knew at once that he did not. That was almost worse. He had seen cruelty and answered it by deciding where she should stand. "No," she said. Everard stopped. Around them, several guests pretended not to listen. "Miss Ainsley." "I said no." His voice lowered. "The crowd is gathering, I can see that. Then you understand why I want you removed from it." "Removed?" The word landed between them. Everard's face changed slightly. He heard it. "Not enough." "Taken away from this," he corrected, "through a side door. For your protection, without asking me." A flicker of pain crossed his expression, quickly hidden. Philippa glanced toward the caricature. "You cannot buy every copy. I can try." "And tomorrow?" He said nothing. "Will you buy every whisper, every drawing, every room in which someone laughs?" "I will not allow them to humiliate you." "Then do not help them decide that I should disappear." That struck him. She saw it. Simon's old accusation seemed to pass between them without being spoken. "You do not know how to love anyone, unless you can protect them from becoming inconvenient." Everard's jaw tightened. "That is not what I am doing." "Is it not?" Philippa's voice remained calm, though her heart had begun to beat hard enough to make each breath deliberate. "You believe me innocent." "Completely. Yet your first answer is to remove me from sight." "My first answer is to spare you this room. It is my choice whether I stay in it." The silence around them had become unbearable. Ursula stood several feet away, watching. Hector was no longer near the marble bust. Philippa could not see him. That, too, she noted. Everard looked at her as though searching for the right words and finding none quickly enough. "The side entrance will be quieter," he said at last. Philippa felt something in her harden, not against him entirely, against the old instinct beneath his concern. The same instinct he had admitted after Simon's death. Control disguised as protection. "Then use it yourself, Your Grace." Lady Granby inhaled softly. Agnes did not move. Everard went completely still. Philippa handed the folded caricature back to Agnes. "I am leaving through the main entrance." "Philippa." It was the first time Everard had used her given name. Quietly, almost helplessly. She looked at him. For one dangerous moment, she wanted to soften. She remembered the watch in her hand, the truth he had trusted her with, the way he had defended the footman, the way he had said Miss Ainsley is not a performance. None of that erased this moment. "You asked me to believe you could learn," she said. "Then learn this." She turned away. Agnes and Lady Granby went with her. The crowd parted reluctantly as Philippa crossed the gallery. Faces followed her, some curious, some mocking, some ashamed enough to lower their eyes. She kept her head high. At the top of the grand staircase, she heard Everard behind her, not close enough to stop her. close enough to ensure no one else did. He followed at a proper distance. That mattered. It did not mend everything. Philippa descended the stairs and crossed the entrance hall beneath the weight of dozens of watching eyes. Then she walked through the main doors of Somerset House into the daylight. No side passage, no purchased silence, no disappearance. Her carriage had not yet been called, so she stood beneath the portico with Agnes and Lady Granby, while the noise of London moved around them. Behind her, Everard stopped inside the doorway. Philippa did not look back. That evening, a sealed note arrived at Russell Square from Lady Ursula Pembury. The offer was written in elegant, gracious language. A comfortable residence in Bath, expenses paid. A respectable withdrawal from London until the scandal passed. Philippa read the letter twice. Then she understood the condition beneath the kindness. Leave quietly, be grateful, disappear. She folded the letter and placed it on the table. Agnes watched her from across the room. "What will you do?" Philippa looked toward the window, where evening settled over Russell Square. In the pocket of her gown, the ivory counter marked 17 remained exactly where it had been. "Stay," she said. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Philippa had declined exile twice. Lady Ursula's offer remained folded on the escritoire in Agnes Vale's drawing-room, its elegant phrases unable to disguise the demand beneath them. A comfortable residence in Bath, expenses paid, respectable distance from London until the scandal faded. Philippa had read the letter once more after breakfast, then placed it back on the table without answering. Agnes watched from her chair near the window. She has made disappearance sound almost luxurious. That is Lady Ursula's particular talent. Will you reply? Yes. Philippa took up a sheet of paper. Briefly. Her answer occupied 4 lines. She thanked the Marchioness for her concern, declined the offer, and stated that she had no intention of leaving London. Nothing more, no accusation, no plea, no anger she could later be accused of regretting. Agnes read the note after Philippa finished. Cruelly polite. I was taught by experts. Agnes smiled. Good. Philippa sealed the letter. The ivory counter remained in her possession, wrapped in linen, inside the small inner pocket of her day dress. She had slept poorly, not from fear, but from the exhausting knowledge that other people had begun constructing versions of her life without permission. By noon, gossip had already grown teeth. A caller sent word that a Philippa had supposedly admitted arranging the broken sugar ornament at Pembury House. Another claimed she had promised a bookmaker she could make the Duke laugh within a week. A third insisted Everard intended to marry her out of gratitude. Philippa refused to answer any of it. Denial, she had discovered, could become another performance when delivered to people who preferred the lie. Shortly after 2, the maid entered and announced that Viscount Fallowby had called. Agnes looked up sharply. Philippa felt no surprise. Hector had been too quiet at Somerset House. "Show him in," she said. Agnes lowered her book. "Are you certain?" "Yes. Then I shall remain exactly where I am. I had hoped you would." Hector entered with polished courtesy, bowed to Agnes, then to Philippa, and took the chair offered to him. He looked entirely at ease. That alone made Philippa wary. Men with nothing to fear rarely needed such perfect composure. "Miss Ainsley," he said, "I am relieved to find you receiving visitors. Were you concerned I had gone to Bath?" His eyes flickered. "Barely. I had heard Lady Pembury was worried for your peace." "Lady Pembury is generous with other people's futures." Hector smiled faintly. "You have had a difficult 2 days." The caricature was cruel, yes, and effective. Agnes turned a page with more force than necessary. Hector glanced toward her, then back at Philippa. I mean, only that scandal is rarely defeated by pretending it does not exist. Then how is it defeated? Sometimes by giving people a version of events they are willing to believe. Philippa did not move. What version would that be? Hector leaned back slightly. A harmless one. You might say the remark at Pembury House was part of a private jest. That the Duke knew you intended to amuse him, that there was no manipulation because there was no deception. Philippa stared at him. You want me to say the laugh was staged? I want you to say it was misunderstood. By whom? Everyone, including His Grace. Hector's expression remained smooth. His Grace need not be involved in every correction made for his benefit. There it was, the contempt beneath the manners. Philippa folded her hands in her lap, and if I agreed, the scandal would disappear, because you would make it disappear, because those who feed it would lose interest. That is not an answer. His smile thinned. It is the only useful one. Philippa looked at him carefully, and His Grace's grief. For the first time, Hector seemed almost amused. Grief is socially useful only while people believe in it. The words entered the room and changed it. Agnes stopped turning pages. Philippa felt something cold settle inside her, but she kept her voice even. That is an extraordinary thing to say. It is an honest one. No, it is merely revealing. Hector's gaze sharpened. You are in danger of confusing moral indignation with power, Miss Ainsley. And you are in danger of confusing power with immunity. Silence followed. Hector did not like that answer. She saw it. He recovered quickly. I came to help you, by asking me to lie, by offering you a way out. Philippa thought of the side entrance at Somerset House, the house in Bath. Now this. Every solution ended with her leaving the room, surrendering the truth, or agreeing that someone else understood what was best for her. No, she said. Hector's expression did not change. You should consider carefully. I have. Scandal can be persistent. So can I. He studied her for several seconds. Then he rose. Very well. Philippa stood as courtesy required. Lord Fallowby. He bowed. At the door he paused. One more thing. She waited. I hope you are not placing too much faith in the Duke of Westerdale's protection. Philippa's pulse changed, though she did not let him see it. Why? Because men who have spent years mistaking control for virtue rarely change because one woman asks them to. The cruelty of the remark lay in its partial truth. Hector knew enough to be dangerous. Philippa looked directly at him. Then I suppose we shall see whether His Grace can learn. Hector inclined his head and left. Agnes waited until the front door closed. I dislike him. So do I. Good. I was afraid I had become unreasonable. Philippa went to the escritoire and wrote down Hector's exact words before memory could soften them. Especially one sentence. Grief is socially useful only while people believe in it. She had barely finished when the maid returned. His Grace, the Duke of Westerdale. Everard entered moments later. One look at Philippa's face told him the visit had not been pleasant. What happened? He asked. Philippa gestured toward the chair opposite. Lord Fallowby was here. Everard's expression hardened. Here, in this drawing room, properly announced, Mrs. Vale was present. His anger did not lessen, but it changed shape. He sat. What did he want? Philippa gave him the conversation exactly as it had occurred. No interpretation, no embellishment. When she repeated Hector's words about grief being socially useful only while people believed in it, Everard became very still. Philippa watched him. That sentence means something to you. It tells me he understands the scandal better than a man who merely heard gossip should. That was my conclusion. Everard leaned forward. I can put an end to this. Philippa heard the old instinct before he finished. How? He stopped. Good. He heard it too. I could make it clear that no house connected to Westerdale will receive anyone who repeats the accusation. And then the gossip loses oxygen, or moves somewhere you cannot see it. Everard exhaled slowly. What do you want me to do? The question was so different from his command at Somerset House that Philippa felt its weight. He had not said what should be done. He had asked, "Find out what the counter proves." She said, "Find out how Hector is connected to it. Find out who printed the caricature, then bring me facts. And until then, do not hide me." His gaze held hers. "I understand. Do you?" "I am beginning to." Philippa believed him enough to let the silence soften. Good. Everard looked toward the small writing table where Ursula's sealed rejection lay ready to be sent. "And Lady Pembury offered me a house in Bath." His eyes narrowed. "You refused?" "Of course." Something like admiration moved through his expression, but he did not praise her for it, as though she needed permission to stay. "What else?" he asked. Philippa told him. He listened. This time he did not interrupt. When she finished, Everard said, "I am sorry. For Hector. For the room at Somerset House. For deciding movement was protection, and expecting you to accept it because I meant well." Philippa studied him. Meaning well is not useless. No, but neither is it sufficient. I know. She believed that too. Before he left, Everard paused near the door. "If Fallowby comes again, I shall receive or refuse him as I choose." He almost smiled. "That was not what I was going to ask." "No, I was going to ask whether you would tell me afterward." Philippa considered him. "Yes, thank you." He left without another command. The next afternoon, word came through Everard's private secretary. The message was brief. The club steward had identified the design. Counter number 17 had an owner, Hector Fallowby. The message from Everard's private secretary arrived shortly before noon on the 5th of June, and Philippa read it twice before folding it along the same crease. Counter number 17 had been identified. The club steward had confirmed the design. The owner, recorded against that number, was Hector Fallowby. Agnes Vale watched from the breakfast table without pretending indifference. "Well?" she asked. Philippa looked down at the small ivory counter resting in its square of linen beside her teacup. The laughing mask seemed more offensive now that it had a name attached to it. "It belongs to Lord Fallowby." Agnes's mouth tightened. "The man who told you he had never seen it." "Yes, then he is either a liar or has suffered a remarkably specific failure of memory." Philippa almost smiled. "I am inclined toward the first explanation." By 2:00, Everard had arrived at Russell Square with Mr. Doring and a leather memorandum book. The formality was deliberate. Philippa understood why before he explained. The counter was no longer merely curious. It was evidence, and evidence became less useful when powerful men handled it without witnesses, and later expected everyone to trust their recollection. Agnes remained in the drawing-room. Mr. Doring stood near the escritoire. Everard sat opposite Philippa, but his attention went first to the linen bundle on the table. "You received my message." "I did." "The steward is willing to examine the counter itself and compare it with the club records." Philippa rested one hand beside the linen but did not touch it, and after that, "It will come back to you." His answer was immediate. "The club has no claim to keep it without your agreement." She studied him. "You have become very careful with possession." "I have had instruction." The faint dryness in his voice did not erase the seriousness beneath it. Philippa looked toward Mr. Doring. Then let us be exact. She unfolded the linen. The ivory counter lay between them, laughing mask upward. I found this beside my slipper at Pembury House after Lord Fallowby dropped it when his Grace laughed. I retained it. I offered it to Lord Fallowby at the opera on the 22nd of May. He denied ever seeing it before. Since then, it has remained in my possession. Mr. Doring wrote every word. Philippa then picked up the counter and placed it in Everard's open palm. For one instant, the contrast struck her. The Duke of Westerdale, one of the highest-ranking men in England, holding a tiny object that had been used to make sport of his grief. Everard looked at it without expression. I receive counter number 17 from Miss Philippa Ainsley for inspection only, he said. Mr. Doring recorded that too. Everard closed his hand. Philippa felt the absence of the counter at once, though not because she had become attached to it. For weeks it had been hers to guard. Now it was moving through a chain that could either produce truth or swallow it. Everard seemed to read the thought in her face. You will have it back. I know. You do not sound convinced. I sound cautious. His gaze held hers. Then remain cautious. That answer mattered. He did not ask her to trust his title. He did not seem offended that she required proof of proper handling. He accepted that trust could be built from conduct rather than assumed from rank. Everard rose. I will return when the examination is complete. Philippa glanced at the memorandum book. With the facts. With the facts. He left with Mr. Doring and the single ivory counter in his possession. The remainder of the afternoon passed more slowly than Philippa expected. She attempted to read, failed, wrote 2 letters, tore up one. Agnes pretended not to notice. By evening, there was still no word. The following morning, shortly after 11, Everard returned. This time, he brought 3 things: the counter, a written statement from the club steward, and a truth uglier than Philippa had expected. Agnes received him and remained near the window. Everard placed the linen-wrapped object on the table before Philippa. First, he said, this belongs to you again. She unfolded the linen. Number 17, laughing mask, no change, no substitution. The same slight dark mark near one edge that she had noticed when she first examined it. Philippa closed the linen around it and returned it to her pocket. Thank you. Everard sat. The steward identified it without hesitation. And the record? The counter system was used by a private circle of gentlemen to settle particular wagers. Each numbered piece was tied to a named participant and a proposition. Philippa already knew enough to feel dread before he continued. Counter 17 belonged to Hector Fallowby. And the proposition? Everard's expression became very still, that the Duke of Westerdale would not laugh before midnight on the 17th of May, 1817. The exact date made the cruelty almost ceremonial. Philippa looked at him. The 10th anniversary. Yes, how heavily had Hector wagered? Very heavily. Enough to ruin him? Everard paused. Not necessarily ruin. Enough to create severe private debt and considerable social embarrassment if payment were enforced. Philippa thought of Hector at the memorial supper, watching the doors, watching the clock, the ivory counter moving between his fingers while Simon was praised by people who imagined themselves respectful. Then the sugar urn had cracked. Philippa had spoken. Everard had laughed. Hector had stood too quickly. It all fit now. So if the laugh was accepted as genuine, he lost. Yes, and if he could convince people it was staged, then he could challenge the wager. Philippa's anger came quietly. By turning me into a cheat. Yes, Everard's answer was equally quiet. She looked away for a moment. And the caricature? There is more. His tone changed. Mr. Doring traced the printer through the paper merchant used for the proof sheets. The printer admitted the commission came through an intermediary. He retained one marked proof copy because the client requested alterations to the caption. What alterations? The first version said, "A laugh bought cheaply." Everard's jaw tightened. The client insisted on a laugh at 50 guineas. Philippa remembered the sheet falling from the catalogue at Somerset House. Her face in a fool's cap, coins spilling around her, Everard chained by the watch. The printer knew who commissioned it, not directly. The intermediary gave no noble name, but he used language taken from the wager itself. What language? That the Duke had failed before midnight on the 17th. Philippa looked at him sharply. That was private. Very. Who knew the exact terms? The participants. The steward. Those who kept the settlement record. And Hector. Yes. Everard leaned forward slightly. The printer still has the marked proof. He is willing to produce it before witnesses. Philippa absorbed this, the counter, the club record, the printer, Hector's lie at the opera, his visit to Russell Square, his offer to make the scandal disappear if she called the laugh staged. He came here because he needed me to give him the sentence that would save him. That is what I believe. Philippa looked at Everard. Believe? He understood the question. The facts strongly support it. I will not call it proven until the chain is complete. She felt something inside her ease, not because the danger had passed. It had not, because he was angry and still refusing to let anger replace evidence. You are learning patience. Do not make it sound pleasant. I would not insult either of us. A brief warmth touched his eyes. Then it faded. Hector is already trying to discredit the steward. How? By suggesting the club records are informal and the steward unreliable. Are they? The records are clear. The steward has served there for 27 years. Philippa considered the problem. Then private proof is not enough. Everard looked at her. No. If this is Sequelswire, society will remember the caricature and forget the correction. I know. Do you? She asked. His face changed slightly. He heard Somerset House in the question, the side entrance, the carriage, his instinct to remove her from the room. I do now, he said. Philippa believed him more than she had expected to. Everard reached into his coat and placed a folded paper on the table. The steward's written identification. You may read it. Philippa did. The statement was simple. Counter number 17 had been assigned to Viscount Fallowby in connection with a wager concerning whether the Duke of Westerdale would laugh before midnight on the 17th of May, 1817. She read it twice, then returned it. What do you want to do? Everard asked. Philippa looked up. The question mattered more than the statement. He had power enough to decide. He was choosing not to. I do not know yet. Then we wait. You dislike that? Profoundly, she almost smiled. Good. It may be strengthening your character. This time he did smile, faintly and without fear. Philippa noticed. She let the moment exist without rewarding it like a performance. Everard saw that too. Perhaps that was why the smile remained a second longer. There is something else I owe you, he said. Philippa's expression changed. What? His gaze held hers. An apology. She waited. Everard did not look away, not the easy kind. Philippa folded her hands in her lap. Then perhaps you should make certain it is the accurate one. Everard did not begin immediately. Philippa had expected apology to make him uncomfortable. She had not expected silence to make him look younger, not younger in years, but stripped for a moment of the composure that usually stood between him and the world. He remained seated opposite her in Agnes Vale's drawing room, his hands quiet, his gaze fixed on hers. The steward's written identification rested folded beside him. Counter number 17 was once again in Philippa's possession, wrapped in linen inside the pocket of her gown. Nothing in the room had changed. Yet she felt that whatever Everard said next would determine whether the distance between them could be crossed or merely described. At last, he said, "At Somerset House I failed you." Philippa did not rescue him from the sentence. "You believed me innocent," she said, "completely. Then say what the failure was." He inclined his head slightly, accepting the demand. "I saw the caricature. I saw people laughing at you. I was angry, and because I was angry, I decided speed was the same as wisdom." His voice remained steady. "I ordered every available copy bought. I called for my carriage. I told you that you would leave through a side entrance." Philippa watched him closely. "You did not ask." "No, you decided." "Yes." He looked down briefly, then back at her. "I told myself I was protecting you from humiliation. In truth, I used my rank to decide where you should stand and called it kindness." The exactness of the admission surprised her. He had not softened it with intention. He had not said that anyone in his position would have done the same. He had not asked her to reward honesty with immediate forgiveness. "And when I refused," she asked, "I tried to persuade you, because you still believed you knew better." Yes, the word cost him. She saw that and did not make it easier. Everard continued, "I repeated the habit I have spent years defending in myself. I see danger, decide what must be done, and move people as though my certainty makes consent unnecessary." Philippa thought of Simon's words. "You do not know how to love anyone unless you can protect them from becoming inconvenient." She suspected Everard was thinking of them too. "Why are you apologizing now?" she asked. "Because evidence has proved Hector lied." "No." His answer came without hesitation. "Hector's guilt does not alter what I did. Even if no proof had been found, I would still have been wrong to make your presence negotiable." Something in her chest tightened. That was the apology she had not known how to ask for. Not defense, not explanation, recognition. Yet recognition was not repair. "I believe you mean it," she said. Everard's expression shifted barely. But sincerity is not restoration." He held her gaze. "I know. Do you? I hope I am beginning to." Across the room, Agnes turned a page. The sound was soft enough to remind them that they were not alone and distant enough to grant them privacy. Philippa folded her hands in her lap. The caricature is still in people's minds. The rumor is still useful to those who prefer it. A quiet correction will not reach the same ears as a public humiliation. Then it should not be quiet. Everard's answer came quickly, but this time he did not continue until she spoke. Philippa noticed the restraint. "There is more," she said. "Your part in it cannot be omitted." A lesser man might have stiffened. Everard only asked, "What do you require me to say?" "The truth." "Which truth?" "That you believed me, that you still chose removal over consent." That protection became another form of erasure. He was silent for several seconds. "Before the same society that watched it happen?" "Yes." "And if it damages my reputation?" Philippa looked at him. "Will it?" "Possibly." "Then perhaps reputation is not the most important thing at risk." Something almost like admiration moved through his face, though it was touched by pain. "No," he said, "it is not." Philippa leaned back. For the first time since Somerset House, she felt the balance between them changing. not because he had surrendered power, but because he had stopped pretending that power excused him from accountability. Then there must be witnesses, she said, people who saw the caricature, people who repeated it, people who will understand what the truth costs Hector. You have a place in mind. It was not a question. Vauxhall Gardens. Everard's brows lifted slightly. Public, fashionable, crowded, exactly. She continued before he could object. Not the general walks. A subscription supper, properly attended, companions present, no secret meeting and no private reckoning that can be dismissed as another ducal arrangement. Everard considered this. Hector would attend if he believed there was something to negotiate. Then let him believe it. And Ursula, she should be there. His expression cooled. You are certain? She offered to finance my disappearance. She publicly reinforced the accusation without evidence. I do not intend to make her the center of the affair, but I will not permit her to stand outside the consequences as though she merely observed them. Everard nodded once. Agreed. Philippa studied him. That was easy. Would you prefer an argument? No. I merely wished to confirm you were still yourself. A faint smile touched his mouth. It did not frighten him. That mattered. What role do you want me to play? He asked. The question settled between them with more weight than any declaration might have carried. Weeks earlier, he would have decided. At Somerset House he had. Now he was asking. Philippa looked at him for a long moment. Beside me. Everard went very still, she continued. Not before me, not behind me, beside me. His gaze did not leave hers. Yes. The simplicity of the answer reached her more deeply than she wanted it to. She looked toward the window where June light rested against the glass. The counter must be identified publicly. The club steward can do that. The record, it remains in club custody. He can bring it. The marked caricature proof, still with the printmaker. Good. Philippa paused. No duplicate evidence. No confusion over possession. The counter stays with me until it is needed. Of course, and Hector must have the opportunity to answer. Everard's face hardened. He has had ample opportunity to lie. Then let him lie where everyone can hear the difference. That silenced him, not because he disagreed, because he understood. Philippa rose and crossed to the small writing table. She drew the linen-wrapped counter from her pocket and placed it on the polished surface. Everard remained seated. She unfolded the cloth. The ivory laughing mask looked almost innocent in the daylight. She turned it over. 17. He denied knowing this, she said. At the opera. Yes, he knew exactly what it was. Yes. Philippa rested one fingertip beside the counter, not touching it. Then he must be made to explain why. Everard rose slowly and came closer, stopping at a respectful distance. He may refuse. Then we give him a question he cannot answer safely. You already have one. Philippa looked at him. Not yet. His eyes moved to the counter. You are thinking of the amount. He knows what he risked. 500 guineas, according to the private terms reported by the steward. Philippa's expression changed. I had not known the amount. Everard understood immediately. Then you will not use it until you hear it from a source entitled to disclose it. Correct. His mouth almost curved again. You are relentless. Careful. The distinction is becoming less obvious. Philippa ignored that. At Vauxhall, the steward identifies the counter and the wager. The printmaker identifies the proof. Hector is asked why he lied. Ursula answers for her part. Then you speak. About Somerset House. Yes. And after that, the question was quieter. Philippa knew he was no longer asking about Hector. She felt the truth of it. and chose not to avoid it. After that, we see what remains. Everard looked at her, and for one moment the room held everything they had not said. The watch she had held, the laughter he had feared, the trust he had broken, the possibility that something between them had survived all three. He did not ask for more. That restraint moved her. Philippa rapped the ivory counter again, but instead of returning it immediately to her pocket, she placed it on the table between them. Then let us ask Lord Fallowby what his grief was worth. On the 13th of June, Philippa discovered that arranging a public reckoning required almost as much restraint as surviving one. Counter number 17 was once again wrapped in linen and in her possession, exactly where it had been since Everard returned it after the club inspection. She had re-wrapped it herself after their conversation 3 days earlier, and had not allowed it to leave her hands since. Now it rested in the inner pocket of her day dress, while she sat in Agnes Vale's drawing room with Everard, Mr. Doring, and 3 sheets of paper spread across the small table between them. No one touched the papers except Philippa. That had been her first condition. The second was that the sequence of the evening would be hers to determine. Everard had agreed without argument. Philippa was still learning how much that mattered. "Hector must be present," she said. "He will be," Everard replied. "He believes you are willing to discuss a private settlement." Philippa looked at him. "You did not tell him that." "No." He was allowed to infer it from the invitation. "Better, Mr." Doring lowered his eyes to hide what might have been approval. Agnes, seated nearby with embroidery, she had not advanced by a single stitch, said, "Men are often most cooperative when they believe. They have invented the opportunity themselves." Everard glanced toward her. "Mrs. Vale, I begin to suspect you have been underestimated for years." "Only by people I preferred to leave disappointed." Philippa returned to the papers. Lady Ursula must also attend. Everard's expression cooled, though he did not object. "She has accepted." "Why?" "Because she believes you intend to withdraw from society after tonight and wants to witness the end of the matter." Philippa felt no surprise. Ursula had always preferred endings that confirmed her judgment. "Then she may witness something else." Everard watched her. "You are certain you want her there?" "Yes. She did not create the wager. We will not accuse her of that. But she knew such wagers existed, encouraged gatherings where women were expected to provoke you for entertainment, repeated the accusation against me without evidence, and offered to finance my disappearance." Philippa's voice remained calm. She should hear the truth in the same world where she helped the lie become respectable. Everard nodded once, agreed. Philippa moved to the next name. "The club steward." "Confirmed." "The settlement record remains with him?" "Yes. It has not left club custody." "Good. He brings it himself and takes it away himself." "Yes. The printmaker?" Mr. Doring answered this time. "Confirmed. He retains the marked proof copy in his possession until it is produced." Philippa looked at him. "No one else has handled that proof since he agreed to appear." "No, Miss Ainsley. And there is only one marked proof, one bearing his production mark and the notation concerning the altered caption." Philippa nodded. "Then it remains with him until the moment he identifies it." Everard's gaze rested on her face. "You have thought of everything." "No, I have thought of what can go wrong." "There is a difference, an important one." He almost smiled. Philippa noticed and continued before the warmth of it distracted her. "We also require witnesses who saw the caricature at Somerset House." Lady Granby had already agreed. Agnes would attend as Philippa's companion. 2 other aristocratic guests who had been present at the exhibition had accepted invitations to the subscription supper without being told the full purpose of the evening. Philippa wanted witnesses, not an audience rehearsed in what to believe. "And you?" Everard asked. Philippa looked up. "What about me? Where will you stand?" She understood the question was not about geography. "At the table." "Beside me?" "Yes." A small change passed through his face, not triumph. Relief, perhaps, and when Hector begins denying everything, I will let him. When Ursula interrupts, I will let her reveal herself too. Everard leaned back slightly. "You are very certain they will speak?" People who have controlled a room for years rarely recognize danger in being heard. Agnes gave a satisfied little sound. Philippa turned to Everard. "There is one more thing. Say it. You do not speak first." He held her gaze. "I know I need to hear you say it. I will not speak first. Even if Hector insults me," a pause. "Even then. Even if Ursula calls me ambitious. Yes. Even if someone questions whether I planned the laugh." Everard's jaw tightened. "Yes." Philippa studied him carefully. "And if I tell you to remain silent, I will be silent." She let the answer settle. Then she said, "Not silent, honest." His eyes changed. The words reached him exactly as she intended. "That I can promise." The room became quiet for a moment. Philippa thought of Somerset House, the side entrance, the carriage, his certainty that removal was protection. Now he sat before her, asking where she wished him to stand and waiting for the answer. Trust had not returned as a feeling. It was returning as behavior. That was slower. It was also more believable. Everard glanced toward the pocket where the counter rested, though the object itself was not visible, and number 17 stays with me. Until I put it on the table. Then it does not leave your possession before that. Correct. Mr. Doring made a note. Philippa looked toward him. No duplicate counter is to be introduced. No sketch substituted for it. No one refers to another counter as though it were this one. Understood. Good. Everard's mouth shifted faintly. You have become formidable. I was always formidable. Most people were simply busy talking. Agnes laughed aloud. Everard did not, but the warmth in his face remained, and Philippa felt something inside her answer it before she could stop herself. By the evening of the 16th of June, Vauxhall Gardens glowed beneath thousands of lamps. Music drifted through the walks. Carriages arrived in steady succession, depositing fashionable guests beneath the evening sky. Philippa came with Agnes and Lady Granby. She wore no dramatic colour, no calculated display. Her gown was elegant, restrained, and chosen for herself. The ivory counter rested in its linen wrapping inside her reticule, now transferred there by her own hand before leaving Russell Square. She had checked it twice. Laughing mask, number 17. The same slight dark mark near the edge. No substitution. No confusion. Everard met them near the reserved supper box. He bowed first to Agnes, then to Lady Granby, and finally to Philippa. His eyes asked a question he did not speak. She gave the smallest nod. Yes, she was ready. Inside the supper box, the arrangements were already in place. The club steward had arrived with the settlement record secured in his own case. He retained possession of it. The printmaker stood nearby with the marked proof protected inside a portfolio he had brought himself. He retained possession of that. No evidence had changed hands. Ursula had not yet arrived. Neither had Hector. Philippa took her place at the table. Everard stood beside her. Not before, not behind, beside. "One final question," he said quietly. "Do you want me here?" Philippa looked at him. "Yes." "Then I stay." Music swelled beyond the supper box. Laughter sounded somewhere along the illuminated walk. For a moment, Philippa thought of another room, another silence, another laugh that had changed everything. She opened her reticule, touched the linen-wrapped counter, and closed it again. Then Lady Ursula entered. Her expression was composed, almost gracious. She greeted Everard first, as rank required, then Philippa, with a look that suggested pity, sharpened into superiority. "My dear," she said softly, "I hope this evening brings you the peace good sense should have provided sooner." Philippa met her gaze. "I hope it brings the truth." Ursula's smile faltered, only slightly. A servant announced another arrival. Hector Fallowby stepped into the supper box. He was smiling when he entered. Then he saw Philippa draw the linen from her reticule. She unfolded it once. The ivory counter rested in her palm, laughing mask upward. She turned it over. 17. Hector stopped. For the first time since Philippa had known him, all the colour left his face. Hector stopped. For the first time since Philippa had known him, all the colour left his face. It returned quickly, but not quickly enough. Lady Granby saw it. Agnes saw it. Everard saw it. So did the club steward, standing near the entrance. With the settlement record still secured in his own case, Philippa held the ivory counter between two fingers and waited until Hector looked at her rather than the object. "Lord Fallowby," she said, "what was this worth if his grace did not laugh before midnight on the 17th of May? Hector answered too quickly. 500 guineas. Silence fell, not the shocked silence of Pembury House when Everard had laughed. This was colder, sharper. The silence of a room, realizing it, had just heard a mistake. Philippa lowered the counter to the table, but did not release it. "How could you know the amount attached to an object you told me you had never seen?" Hector's mouth tightened. "I may have heard the sum mentioned." "By whom?" "I do not recall. Yet you recalled the amount exactly." Lady Ursula shifted in her chair. "Surely this has gone far enough." Philippa did not look at her. "No, Lady Pembury. It has only just begun." Ursula's expression hardened. Hector gave a small laugh, but there was no ease in it. "This is theatrical, Miss Ainsley." Philippa looked at the carved laughing mask beneath her fingers. "I agree. Someone has made a spectacle of grief for years. I would like to know who profited from it." Hector's gaze moved toward Everard. Perhaps he expected the Duke to intervene. Everard did not. He remained where Philippa had asked him to stand, beside her. Silent, honest, Philippa turned toward the club steward. "Mr. Weatherby, will you identify this counter?" The steward stepped forward. He was an older man with greying hair and the grave manner of someone who had spent decades watching gentlemen behave badly under excellent chandeliers. Philippa lifted her hand. He did not take the counter. He examined it where it lay beneath her fingers. "Yes, Miss Ainsley. Ivory counter number 17. Laughing mask on the face. Number on the reverse. And to whom was it assigned? Viscount Fallowby." Hector's face became still. Philippa turned the counter over. 17. "For what proposition, Mr.?" Weatherby opened his case and withdrew the settlement record. He retained it in both hands, that his Grace, the Duke of Westerdale, would not laugh before midnight on the 17th of May, 1817. A murmur moved through the supper box. Beyond the open frontage, music continued through Vauxhall Gardens. Lamps glowed among the trees. Somewhere nearby, people were laughing freely, unaware that inside the reserved box, a man's 10 years of grief had just been reduced to an entry in a betting record. Philippa looked at Hector. "And the stake?" Mr. Weatherby replied 500 guineas. No one spoke. Hector rose. private wagers among gentlemen are hardly a matter for public judgment. Everard's expression changed, but he still did not speak. Philippa said, "Perhaps not, but a private wager becomes public when losing it requires destroying someone else's name." Hector looked at her coldly. "You have no proof I did any such thing." "Then let us continue." She turned to the printmaker. The man stepped forward with the portfolio he had brought himself. He opened it and removed one marked proof sheet. He retained possession as he held it up for those present to see. Philippa's caricature appeared again. Fool's cap, coins, watch chain. Everard made into a prisoner of her supposed ambition. Philippa felt the old humiliation stir, but it no longer owned the room. "You printed this?" she asked. "Yes, miss." "At whose order?" "The commission came through an intermediary." Hector's mouth curved slightly. Philippa continued. "And did the client request alterations?" "Yes." The printmaker pointed to a notation in the margin. The first caption was, "A laugh bought cheaply." The client instructed me to change it to a laugh at 50 guineas. "Did the client use any other particular wording?" "Yes. He said the Duke had failed before midnight on the 17th. Philippa looked toward Mr. Weatherby. "Was that phrasing part of the private wager?" "It was." Hector's expression tightened. "That proves nothing. Many men knew of the wager. Not many men lost 500 guineas on it," Lady Granby said. Hector ignored her. Philippa folded her hands. "You came to my home, Lord Fallowby." His gaze snapped back to her. "You offered to make the scandal disappear if I declared the laugh staged. I offered you practical advice. You told me grief was socially useful only while people believed in it." Ursula inhaled softly. Hector's composure finally cracked. "You have no witness to my meaning." Agnes closed the book she had brought with her. "I was in the room." Hector looked at her. Agnes's expression was mild. "I may be elderly, Lord Fallowby. I am not deaf." A few guests shifted in their seats. Philippa could feel the balance turning. Hector felt it too. "This is absurd," he said. "A woman becomes the subject of a caricature, and suddenly every private wager in London is laid at my feet." "No," Philippa replied, "only number 17. She lifted the counter again. "The one I saw in your hand at the memorial supper. The one you dropped when His Grace laughed. The one you denied ever seeing at the opera. The one the steward identifies as yours." Hector's silence was answer enough, but Philippa did not mistake silence for proof. She turned toward Ursula. "Lady Pembury, you knew wagers existed." Ursula's chin lifted. "I knew of foolish speculation. Nothing more. Yet you repeatedly hosted gatherings where women were encouraged to amuse His Grace. Society encourages many things. You publicly called my cleverness ambition after the caricature appeared. I expressed concern without evidence." Ursula's mouth tightened. Philippa continued. "Then you offered to pay for me to leave London. For your own peace. No, for yours." The words landed cleanly. Ursula stared at her. Philippa did not raise her voice. "You did not create Hector's wager. I do not accuse you of that. But when the lie arrived, you made it respectable because it suited the order you preferred. You wanted me gone before truth could make your judgment look cruel." Ursula's face hardened. "You forget yourself." "No," Philippa said. "That has been the problem. Other people kept trying to decide where I should be." Silence followed. Then Everard moved. He did not step before Philippa. He simply came fully beside her. "My turn," he said quietly. Philippa looked at him and gave the smallest nod. Everard faced the room. "At Somerset House, I believed Miss Ainsley innocent." Hector's expression changed. Ursula went still. Everard continued. "I saw the caricature. I saw people laughing at her, and I decided, without asking, that she should be removed through a side entrance. He paused. I called that protection. It was not. No one interrupted. I used rank to decide where she should stand. I treated her presence as negotiable because I believed my concern excused my authority. His gaze moved once toward Philippa, then back to the room. I was wrong. The words had no ornament. That made them powerful. Miss Ainsley's dignity never depended on my belief in her. It never depended on my title, my affection, or my willingness to defend her. She possessed it before I noticed her, while I failed her, and now. Philippa felt something inside her loosen, not because he had saved her. He had finally understood that she had never required saving in order to possess worth. Everard turned to Hector. As for you, the club committee has already received the steward's statement and the settlement record. Your membership will be terminated under its authority. You are barred from Westerdale House, Halewood Park, and every private business association under my control. Your debts remain your own. Hector's face went pale again. You cannot dictate society. No, Everard said, but I can dictate my door. He turned to Ursula. You will have no further role in any observance held in Simon's memory. You will also withdraw, publicly and without qualification, every accusation you made against Miss Ainsley. Ursula stared at him. Your Grace, now. The single word ended the argument. Ursula looked around the supper box and understood that every face had become a witness. Very well. Her voice was tight. I withdraw my remarks concerning Miss Ainsley's motives. I had no evidence for them. Philippa did not thank her. Truth did not require gratitude from the person wronged. Hector turned toward the exit. Mr. Weatherby closed the settlement record and returned it to his case. The printmaker replaced the marked proof in his portfolio. Philippa looked down at counter number 17. The object that had fallen beside her slipper now lay openly on the table, stripped of mystery and power. She placed it in the steward's waiting evidence box. The transfer was witnessed, the lid closed. Everard did not propose. Philippa did not weep. He simply offered his hand. She looked at it, then at him. He waited. She placed her hand in his. Outside the supper box, the orchestra began another tune. Everard asked quietly, Do you wish to leave, Philippa? Looked toward the lamps, the walks, and the people beyond who at once seemed capable of deciding whether she should remain visible. No, she said. For once, I should like to stay exactly where I am. For 11 weeks after the evening at Vauxhall, Everard Sedgwick did something society had once considered impossible. He waited. He did not rush Philippa with declarations made urgent by scandal. He did not send jewels large enough to become arguments. He did not ask the Prince Regent to notice her, nor did he use invitations to force every fashionable drawing room to revise its opinion. He courted her properly. He called during respectable hours. He walked with her in public gardens when Agnes Vale or Lady Granby accompanied them. He sent books only after learning which ones she actually wanted to read. When he disagreed with her, he did not mistake disagreement for disobedience. When he wished to help, he asked first. The change was not dramatic enough for gossip, which perhaps made it more valuable. Philippa saw it in small things. A question asked before a carriage was summoned, a pause before advice became command, a silence held long enough for her to finish speaking. Trust returned in increments, so did laughter. Not often, never on demand. Sometimes Everard smiled when Agnes insulted an especially pompous caller after the door had closed. Once, Lady Granby declared that a certain Viscount possessed the rare gift of entering a room and lowering its intelligence. And Everard laughed so suddenly that Philippa looked at him in surprise. He stopped at once, not from fear this time, from habit. Then he looked at her. She smiled. He laughed again. Society noticed, of course. Society always noticed what it had no right to own, but there were no more wagers. No one dared ask Philippa to perform. Hector Fallowby disappeared from the circles where he had once moved with polished confidence. His debts remained his own. His club membership was ended under committee authority, and Westerdale doors were closed to him. Lady Ursula Pembury issued the public retraction she had been ordered to make, though she did so with the expression of a woman who considered truth an unforgivable inconvenience. Her place in future observances for Lord Simon was gone. Philippa neither celebrated nor mourned either consequence. Justice, she had discovered, did not always require triumph. Sometimes it required only that cruelty lose access to the rooms where it had once been protected. Near the end of August, Everard asked Philippa to marry him in Agnes Vale's drawing room, in daylight, without an audience beyond Agnes, pretending not to listen from the far window. He did not kneel. He did not offer rescue. He said, "I love the way you refuse to become what other people expect from you. I love that you saw me as a man before you had any reason to care whether I was happy. I love that you corrected me when I was wrong, and stayed when leaving would have been easier. I cannot promise never to make another mistake." Philippa had looked at him steadily. "That would be a foolish promise." "I thought you might say so. What can you promise?" he had answered without hesitation. "That I will not hide behind good intentions when I do harm, that I will ask when asking is required, that I will listen when listening is harder than acting, and that I will never treat your presence as something I have the right to move." Philippa had felt tears then, but she had not let them make the decision for her. She asked for time. Everard gave it. 3 days later, she chose him. On the 28th of August, 1817, Philippa Ainsley married Everard Sedgwick in a quiet Hampshire parish church. There was no crowd of curious strangers, no orchestra, no ballroom waiting to fall silent. Agnes stood close enough to squeeze Philippa's hand before the ceremony began. Lady Granby cried without shame and denied it afterward. Mr. Doring looked relieved by every practical detail occurring on schedule. When the vows were complete, Philippa became Duchess of Westerdale. But the title did not change the fact that had mattered from the beginning. She had possessed dignity before rank. She had possessed a voice before anyone powerful listened. Marriage gave her a husband, not a worth she had lacked. 8 days later, on the 5th of September, Philippa sat with Everard on a grassy bank near the River Itchen beneath a pale blue late summer sky. The day was warm enough for a picnic and quiet enough that the sound of water moving over stones seemed louder than the distant carriage waiting beyond the trees. There were no guests, no musicians, no witnesses beyond a pair of indifferent birds, and one bold rook that had already shown dangerous interest in the pastry basket. Philippa sat on the edge of the picnic cloth with her gloves beside her, had removed his hat and placed it near the basket. For once, the Duke of Westerdale looked entirely unobserved. Philippa liked him best that way. He reached into his coat. She knew what he held before she saw it. The gold pocket watch rested in his palm. The case shone warmly in the afternoon light. Everard opened it. The hand still showed 6:10. Philippa looked at them, then at him. "You have carried it every day." "Yes, and never wound it." "No." There was no shame in his answer now, only honesty. He looked toward the river. For years I believed that if I moved the hands, I would be leaving Simon behind. Philippa said nothing. He did not need agreement. He needed room. I thought stillness was loyalty. He continued, that if I remained unchanged, then the last unfinished moment between us would remain unchanged too. His thumb rested against the small winding crown. But memory does not ask that of us. Philippa looked at him. No. Everard drew a slow breath. I cannot know what Simon would have said to me if he had lived another hour. I cannot repair the last argument. I cannot make myself wiser at 30 than I was. You were 30. I was insufferable. That may still be repairable. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. You see why I married you. I assumed it was my profound tenderness, among other terrors. Philippa smiled, but she did not look away from the watch. Are you ready? Everard considered the question. I think readiness may be another excuse for waiting. Then do it before you become analytical. He gave her a dry look. Simon would have liked you. The words were quiet. Philippa did not pretend to know whether they were true. I would have liked to know him. Everard lowered his gaze. Then, with his own fingers, he wound the watch. The sound was small, almost nothing, a delicate mechanical resistance beneath his thumb. He adjusted the hands to the present time. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then the watch began to tick. Philippa heard it. Everard did too. His face changed, not because grief vanished, but because it no longer stood alone. He closed his fingers around the watch and pressed it briefly against his palm. Then he placed it on the picnic cloth between them. The gold case caught the sunlight. Tick, 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 time moving without apology. Everard looked toward the river. I thought this would feel like losing him. And does it? He was quiet for a moment. No, Philippa waited. It feels like remembering him without obeying the worst day of my life. She reached across the cloth and rested her hand near his, not over it. Everard turned his palm upward. She placed her fingers in his. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The rook chose that moment to descend with astonishing confidence, seize a piece of pastry from Everard's plate, and retreat several yards before stopping to examine its prize. Everard stared after it. Philippa followed his gaze. Your Grace, I believe you have finally met someone less impressed by your rank than I am. Everard laughed. The sound came easily, warmly, without shock. No room fell silent. No guest stared. No man reached for an ivory counter. No one calculated the cost. Philippa laughed with him as the rook escaped with its stolen pastry, and the river moved beside them under the September sun. On the picnic cloth, between 2 unfinished cups and a folded napkin, the gold watch continued to tick.